Hi, you're listening to Scribble Talk, a podcast for bid and proposal professionals. My name is Bhaskar Sundaram, and with my co-host,
Ashley Hayes,
we will be sitting down with our industry veterans to share their stories, discuss their career, and learn how to make an impact in the industry.
Today's guest is Chris Whyatt. Chris has spent the last 25 years of his career working in adjacent disciplines of sales and bidding. After winning major £10 million deals with British Gas, Barclays Bank, and the Halifax Building Society in the late 90s, Chris established Practical Bid Solutions Limited, PBSL, as an independent bid consultancy. This work led to more involvement with sales improvement programs, and as a result, PBLS was rebranded as Get to Great in 2008. And he supported 100 plus small and big organizations such as VMware, McAfee, Nice Systems, Camelot, HP, Glory, LivePerson, Virtual Clarity, G2 Speech, NetApp, Babcock, NTT, Sims. Chris has been delivering training programs for TechUK for 15 years and has supported clients on more than 50 major deals, co-created 25 business-winning frameworks, trained more than 1,000 people in sales and bid aspects of business. Chris co-founded the UK chapter of the Association of Proposal Management Professionals in 2001 with Jon Williams and served on the board as COO for the first 3 years. He was a fellow of the Sales Leadership Alliance, which rebranded the Association of Sales Professionals. Chris has conducted extensive research into improving the working relationship between sales and bid, publishing his second paper on the subject in January 2020. Welcome, Chris, to Scribble Talk. So great to have you with us.
Likewise, thank you very much.
So Chris, on this podcast, we typically like to start in the beginning. We're curious where you were born, where you grew up, and where you went to school.
I was born in St. Peter Port, Guernsey, which is one of the Channel Islands off the south coast of the UK, actually nearer France than the UK. I was born there because my dad was there on a year's assignment managing a shop, and I just happened to be born while I was there. And after that came back to mainland UK and lived in sort of North London in the latter part of the 50s. And I think then moved down to the West Country, Somerset, probably 1961 or something like that, and was brought up in Somerset.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, very. I had a very good childhood and upbringing. And I've got a younger brother who's 3 or 4 years younger than me, so it's good. Not much of an education, I would have to say. I went to a sort of second-tier school because, you know, we have a system of sifting out the bright ones at 11, and I didn't make the sifting. So I was not great at school, I have to say. I left school at 16, and, you know, I just really wanted to get out and get a job.
Okay, so what was your first job doing then?
Bizarrely, I'd always wanted to get into the computer industry. When you consider that this was my first desire to do that was 53 years ago.
Right.
At 14, because there was a television program called Tomorrow's World, and it always had these wonderful things called computers. And I always just thought that it would be always changing, always new, always lots to learn. You know, it was never going to be, you know, same stuff, different day kind of stuff. And when I was 16 or 17, I think early 1970, yes, I'll be 17, I saw an advert for a trainee computer operator. Now, where I lived, in the county I lived, there were only 5 computers in the whole of the county.
Oh my gosh.
So I was lucky that one of them wanted a trainee computer operator. I'm not really sure what the qualifications were because obviously, you know, I'd never seen a computer until I went for the interview and they showed me this big thing in an air-conditioned room. And somehow I don't remember much about the interview, but I got the job and just started being a computer operator. So to me, it was the key to sort of, you know, traveling, living in different places. As long as you could do something with computers, you'd always have a job. So I've been very lucky, and I've just celebrated the 50th anniversary last month of going into computers. And I've always really worked with tech companies largely. Even the last 20 years, probably 50% of my revenues come from tech companies.
Wow. So that was definitely amazing strategy. So 50 years in computers. When did you first enter proposals then, or kind of the sales aspect that you tend to focus on?
I'll try and tell this in the shortest possible way. When I started as a computer operator, I realized there was no future in it because it's illogical to have people operating computers.
Mm.
It just doesn't make sense. The computer knows what day it is, what time it is. If you tell the computer, instead of the operator, what you want to do every morning at 8 o'clock and every evening at 5 o'clock, and on Thursday you want to do this, the computer can do it for itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when I was 21, I started creating software to automate the job that I was doing. And quite a lot of my friends are going, "You're going to do us out of a job?" And I said, "No, I'm going to take us into technical jobs." And then, I don't know, mid-70s, probably, so, I don't know, 23, 24, somebody said, "Oh, that's good software. Can I buy it?" And I was like, yeah, okay. And they said, "How much?" And I made up a number, and they just said, "Send me a bill." So I suddenly I was selling software.
Yeah.
And then every time I went for an interview for a job, I said, "Oh, I've got all this software to automate the way you run computers." People are going like, "Wow, how much is it?" And I think I started off at £1,500. The second one was 4,000. The third one was 8,000. And I was sort of selling it for £8,000 at a time. Well, about then, that was a year's salary.
Yeah.
So people would just not blink because it would save probably 10 or 12 full-time job equivalents.
Right.
So for the cost of one salary, you could move all those other people into more important roles. So it was. So I was in sales, really, just selling the software I developed. And then mid-80s, I sold that company to another company because the computer industry obviously moves very fast, which is why I went into it. And I think my technical skills were getting outdated. And I became the sales manager for the north of England, I guess mid-80s perhaps. So I then was just full-time sales. They took me out of technical roles. And we were selling this software and people were saying, "Can we have a proposal? Can we have a proposal?" Because, of course, what we were selling was revolutionary. The people didn't go to tender for it. It was always, wow, so we can automate all those manual jobs. Give us a proposal for doing it, because they had to justify it. But I can't ever remember actually responding to a tender for it.
Yeah, they were like sole sources.
Yeah, it was just like, well, because of the marketing tactics we used, we were so dominant in the market. We had over 50% of the market. So it was like, well, yeah, there are other products out there, but 50%. And we were very niche in that we sold into, if one company that we sold to adopted this, all their competitors would adopt it. So as soon as you sold into one, I don't know, shoe manufacturer, all the other shoe manufacturers would do the same thing. So it was the easiest job in the world. But I learned to craft proposals, and my dad was, his hobby was writing, and he's had books published and everything. And he wrote for magazines and everything. So I really enjoy language and articulating stuff. And then mid-90s, I didn't want to work for a small firm anymore. I wanted to go and work for a big firm. So I went and worked for what became Fujitsu and got into responding to tenders. And that's where the British Gas and then the Barclays one came out. And that was really the first time I'd ever seen a full-blown invitation to tender. And my instinct was to book a meeting room for the duration of the bid. We all worked in the meeting room because I thought that was the only way we were ever going to get any focus. And we had what I now know are win themes and key messages on the wall. And we used to lock the room when we went home in the evening.
Yeah.
And we didn't put stuff in waste paper bins because we were worried about industrial espionage. And then we won both those deals, which were renewals of contracts, which doesn't, and then they made me the sales manager. And because I'd won the tenders, and the most boring job in the world was just managing a team of salespeople, and I wasn't allowed to go and see customers. So I joined the firm Computer Center that I'd just beaten on the 2 other deals, and worked on what I think was a sort of career-defining deal at the Halifax, which was my sort of most memorable deal, really. But anyway, I jump ahead. Go on. You asked me more questions.
So you mentioned something to me that made me curious. So you started in computers, like before computers are what they are today, right? And then you started coding very, very early. And I understand that software coding used to be very different than how it is today. Can you tell us a little bit of how that has evolved?
I've looked at current coding, and actually the logic is still really the same. It's, I mean, in those days, there was no online stuff. So you weren't coding for a user interface through a screen. It was more what we call batch processing. So this stuff ran on the mainframe. There was no sort of user interface, if you know what I mean. But the sort of, if this happened to do this, otherwise do this. It doesn't seem that much difference to me. And COBOL, the language, was a big thing 50 years ago, and it is still a very desirable skill. And in the UK, a lot of government systems still run on COBOL, on the same operating systems they ran on a long, long time ago. So yes, it has changed because obviously a lot of it is now, it's through a user interface on a screen, isn't it? But the sort of background logic looks quite different. I mean, I look at the coding on my website that through WordPress or whatever, and it makes sense to me still. I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah, no. I thought that in the early days of coding, there were like cards or something that the programs were on. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. And we used to do quite mischievous things with the cards. Yeah. So it was crazy. You'd write something up on a sheet of paper with 80 columns on. So you'd write up what you wanted. You'd give it to the people in the punch room. Yeah. They would then punch it into cards, and you'd read the cards into the computer. It was just crazy. And then somebody thought, though, this is silly. Why don't we have punch machines where instead of it going on cards, it goes straight into the computer?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then, and that's sort of where I started thinking, well, I know every day what the computer's going to have to do because I ran the schedule. So I set the work up 4 years in advance, if you know what I mean, because everything's very repetitive, isn't it? By nature, the computers are there to do repetitive tasks. And then sort of people said, well, what are you going to do now? Because you've done 5 years worth of your work. The computer's just going to sit there and say, oh, it's Monday and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I know what I've got to do now because it's already there for me. So I sort of moved on to doing other things.
So you started telling us a little bit about your most memorable proposal offer. Can you expand on that a little bit?
I think, yes, and it's something I come back to a lot. It was when I went to work at Computer Center, they sort of had a model where you ran your own P&L, and I was given the job of running the account with one of the then big banks in the UK, which is called the Halifax, and it was in a town called Halifax. And there were 4 suppliers, and they wanted to rationalise to one supplier for sort of desktop, client server, products and services and so on. And I think the contract was probably worth between 15 and 20 million a year. And there was Unisys, Management Tally, and a company called SCC, all doing the same thing in different parts of the bank. So they had 4 suppliers, and they thought it was logical to get down to one. So I looked at it when I took it on, and I think the computer center team was about 80 people. And I was the sort of account director. And I still have to pinch myself and think, wow, what a lucky person. And I thought, we've got a mountain to climb here. And I really needed to get the team behind me to climb this mountain. So within a couple of days of being there, I organised, like a sort of town hall meeting in a local hotel, and put on food and drink, and put some flip charts all around the walls in this massive room, and invited everybody. And I said, this is the challenge. And if we fail that challenge, you will all end up working for one of the other suppliers. And if we win it, you will stay working for Computer Center, and everybody else from the other suppliers will end up working for us. What do you want? And they said, we want to win the contract. And I said, okay, we need to understand, where we're good, where we're bad, who's for us, who's against us, what the strategy is to win the deal, who we need to get to, who we need to influence. So, unwittingly, I suppose, capture planning. And we ran a sort of an 18-month campaign, and which of the last 3 or 4 months was the ITT coming out, because they just delayed and delayed and delayed. And we found out that the problem was that they didn't know what they wanted, because each supplier was offering the same things in a different way, if you get what I mean. So They had no clear definition of what they wanted, because obviously they couldn't say, we want what Computer Center do, or we want what Unisys do, which was different, or we want what SCC do, or Management Tally. So they really struggled to come up with a definition of what they wanted. So when the ITT came out, it had a sort of very basic service in it. And by the way, if anybody looks on my LinkedIn profile, they'll see some of the material from that time, which I posted a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, and when the tender came out, we had a sort of strategy meeting for the bid, and one of the guys said, this is crazy, because what they've asked for is a lower level of service than we deliver now. So I said, okay, what do you think we should do? He said, well, we should propose what we deliver now. And I said, yeah, but that's going to get us, we're not going to be compliant. So we came up with a strategy of obviously being compliant. So if they wanted something, that was mauve and 3 feet tall, we offered them that. But we came up with a compliant plus solution that was basically what we were doing now. So here's a better way of doing what you've asked for. So here's a compliant solution. Here's a better way of doing what you've asked for. We also came up with a third strand that was an innovative solution, which was better ways that we haven't done already, that if you give us the contract, we could do it for. So there were 3 strands to the approach. And they ended up taking what we would call a pick and mix approach. They looked at what we were offering when they awarded us the contract and said, that's actually what we want, a menu of services, because different bits of the bank want different levels of service. And you've succeeded in doing what we've not done, in defining, what we actually need. And that's why we won the contract. And I believe Computer Centers still have the contract.
So you've shared so much about your career and a little bit kind of about yourself and what motivates you. What are 3 things that not many people would know about you?
Do you know, I looked at that question. I was a choir boy When I went to live in Taunton in Somerset in, I think, 1961, so I was 8, I went to a church school, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we did was, it was a Church of England, was we used to go to church as part of going to school, and there was a choir, and I joined the choir, and I was a choir boy until I was 14, and the inevitable happened, and I couldn't sing anymore. And people sort of go, "You were a choir boy?" Yeah, and I absolutely loved it. And I was an altar boy, and yeah, it was really good. I think a lot of other people don't know I lived in Australia as well. So in early 1974, I went. You could emigrate then for £10. So went on a plane to Melbourne, got off a plane, went in the Yellow Pages, looked up, companies who had computers, and just walked around with my CV saying, I'm looking for a job as a computer operator. And I got a job as a computer operator. And I lived there for 2.5 years.
Oh, cool.
And I think, not a lot of people know that I was an automated ops sort of pioneer. And I remember, in conversation sometimes with customers, when I say, I did automated ops on mainframes in the early 70s, and I wrote all the software and stuff, people go, so you were a programmer and system? Yes. And yeah. Oh, right. Okay. Oh, I just assumed, I don't know what I assumed. I think they're always surprised that that's my background.
Yeah. Not always, people who are in the sales aspect have done the actual programming themselves, right? So
yeah, and mine was sort of systems programming. So it wasn't commercial programming in the sense of writing a program to do payroll. It was more writing programs to run the computers, which was much more my thing, really.
Yeah,
it was great. I loved it. I still got a lot of the material, which I sometimes rather sadly look at. But those were the 3 things I put down that people don't know about me.
Love it. So again, you have so many accomplishments. Are there any accomplishments that you're most proud of?
I think the automated ops thing, obviously. And I remember talking to I've got 3 children. I was talking to my youngest son once about his brother and how well his brother had done. And my youngest son said to me, he was an adult then, and he said, Dad, but, what about you and that computer company you had? That was amazing stuff. And I said, yes, thank you. You're right. And I think, obviously, being a father, I think I get more, the fulfillment of being a dad is just amazing. My eldest son was nominated for a BAFTA last year, which he didn't get. But, he was nominated, and it was a program about Windrush, which is something close to my heart I'm very passionate about. And he made a program about that was shown on BBC. So that was great.
Yeah.
So very proud as a dad.
Yeah.
And I think a project I did for VMware, 2 projects I did for VMware in UK, and one was for EMEA. I think my work for VMware, I would say, in the last 20 years, probably the best stuff I've ever done, we had a project called Destination 1 Billion, which doesn't need much explanation.
Yeah.
And that project, which I I defined and ran, VMware did all the work. I just ran it. They that reached the 1 billion, so that was great. And before that, I did a big project for VMware, just defined it again, which was sort of transforming them from being transactional to being a sort of solution sell, as it would be then, or a value sell. And those are 2 things I still look at the material and think, did I do that?
Yeah.
Very proud of those. So those are the 3 things, really.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Very impressive. And,
Thank you.
Also being a father, I can tell that you're a very proud father, and your family is very important to you.
Yeah.
So you've been in the industry for more than 25 years, and really more kind of like the sales and bid side of it. We talked a little bit about how software has changed and programming, but what about, kind of the sales and bid cycle? How has that changed and evolved?
That's a very good question. Obviously, from a bid point of view, it's always been very formalized, but I think it's become perhaps a bit, rigid's perhaps not the quite word, but even more structured and more objective, and there's less scope for, I wouldn't say creativity, but there's less, if you tick all the right boxes and do all the right things, you've got a better chance of winning. I think the sort of subjectivity that happened before seems to have evolved, has changed. And I think, the value thing now, really understanding the customer requirement, and that's what it's all about. I always akin it to, if you were planning a political campaign, you'd sit down and say, right, what does the electorate really care about? And what's our strategy for tackling that? And, how are we going to get that message across? And I often say to people, imagine you're down to the last 2 or 3 bidders and you're doing the presentation to the customer, and you're on your last slide, and the last slide's on the screen, and you've got 3 bullets. And, you say to the customer in summary, boom, boom, boom. What are those 3 things? What's the boom, boom, boom that you're going to close your argument for the deal? And everything, works back from that. There's a politician who's a bit Marmite for a lot of people, a guy called Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister, and he had this thing for his second, when he was re-elected, this sort of pledge card, which was the size of a business card, and he had 5 pledges on it. Bullet, 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 bullet. And, a lot of work went into getting those 5 pledges down. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to have, I think now about being succinct. I'm sorry for the long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. Has never been more true. It's about being succinct and, making it easy for the customer to buy from you, really.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, that resulted in things like get Brexit done. Anyway, let's not get political.
So you have this motto, get to great. What does that mean to you? What do those words mean to you?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that, the way it started is there's a book called Good to Great, which is a very good business book. And off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of the author, but it's a bit outdated now. But obviously I couldn't use the phrase good to great. But the book is about good companies that he tracks over a period of time. One of them became accelerated away from the others. So one went from being good to being great. So I just thought that a play on that would be get to great. So, but you define what great looks like. So when I work with clients on transformation stuff, I say, okay, we're 2 years down the track. What do you want to be able to say about your business? We're great at this, we hit this number, we hit this level of customer sat and so on. So, okay, so that's what great looks. You've defined great. So that's where you want to get to, yeah? So where are you now on those KPIs? Well, we're here. So we're here now. That's what good looks like in a couple of years' time. And I remember when I did the project for NICE, we called that Transform EMEA 2020. And this was in 2016. And the plan was to, guess what? Transform EMEA by 2020. And I think we did it by January 17. Just using that methodology, because people had a clear vision of what the business needed to look like. and a plan to get from where we were to where we wanted to be. And that's really the essence of the Get to Great. That's the meaning.
Yeah, that's amazing. So with this,
but they define what great is. I don't.
Yeah. That's important, right?
Mm.
So you run your own business and you've been doing it successfully for years. What do you like best and least about running your own company?
The best bit is doing the projects. Mm-hmm. Absolutely the best bit. And that's the bit that the customer sees and people say, wow, I want to do what you do. I'm going to quit my job and do what you do. But it's the business winning aspect, the endless meetings, the chasing stuff, and people. I think probably the most frustrating. Yeah, it's winning the business, but also, the conversations you have with people who are clearly just not willing to take the leap of faith and change. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes. This sounds a bit critical, but you're in a job, things aren't going great, but if you don't rock the boat, you might survive 18 months and longer and get a nice payoff to leave, and so it's covering your derriere. And it's the lack of courage, and the great people I've worked with, and I could name them on the fingers of one hand, really. Mm-hmm. The great customers I've had who just say, Chris, this is what works. This is not working. This is what it should look like. Can you make it happen? And it's the lack of courage, I think, that frustrates me. Yeah, mm-hmm. I know we've got a problem, but actually, if we just pedal faster, it'll get better. Hope is not a strategy, and so many people just hope that it'll get better. Yeah. And you have to grab it by the, you have to grab the nettle and fix it. You have to do something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But it's people who do things who make mistakes. It's people who do nothing that never make mistakes.
Right.
So that's the frustration, I think, the lack of courage to do something.
So you are the UK APMP co-founding member. Any fond memories as the COO or any experiences afterwards?
Yeah, I think, starting it up with Jon, and I'm sure Jon told you the story that I'd rung him up and got his voicemail and left him a message saying, I think we need to do something around a trade body for bid and proposal people. And he'd been in a meeting where they discussed, or Jon had come to the conclusion we needed to do it. And he got back in the car and turned his phone on. You have one voice message. He played the message and he said, wow, that's really weird. And he rang me back and said, I'll give Tony Birch a ring because I think he wants to do APMP in the UK. And then the first meeting that I remember was one that when Jon was working at Compaq, that was hosted at Compaq. And I think BJ Lowney came and did an absolutely wonderful piece of facilitation around something that would take too long to describe, but was really good. And then not long after, I'd been working on for Compaq as a freelancer, the bid into Camelot for an organisation called the People's Lottery, run by Richard Branson, to run the lottery. Mm. And they came within a hair's breadth of winning that business from Camelot. And working on that was really great. And then after it was over and Camelot retained the business because of one minor mistake made by the People's Lottery, we, APMP, managed to get the guy who ran the Camelot bid and then Norman, who ran the People's Lottery bid, to come and present at 2 consecutive APMP meetings on running the bid. So we got the winner's perspective, and then the next meeting, which was down near Gatwick Airport, if I remember rightly. We had Norman, whose name escapes me, came and talked about the People's Lottery bid, because obviously I'd worked with him on that. Mm-hmm. And that was really fascinating, because obviously that was a massive procurement.
Yeah.
And it was just like, after they finished talking for an hour, it was like, anybody got any questions? And people were just like, huh? Wow.
Yeah, just in awe, right?
And I remember the guy from the Camelot, who were the incumbent, saying that they were waiting for the ITT to come out, and they realised that they might as well start responding now before the ITT came out, because this, why sit around and wait it when we know what we would do if it came out today. So mm-hmm. They started creating a response before the tender came out.
Yeah.
And I think there were 20 lots of which you had to bid for all the lots. And they started 20 work streams for this. And he said more than 50% of the content they wrote, they were able to use when the ITT came out. So that taught me a big lesson. But one of the other things about it was that they already had their supply chain in place for the 20 lots, whereas anybody else who was bidding had to run 20 procurements with 80 suppliers to find a supplier for each of the lots before they could start responding to the tender. So they were months behind Camelot when the process started, if you know what I mean. Camelot read the ITT, started responding.
Right.
The other bidders had to run 20 procurements, of which one of them was the compact one, which I worked on, which was brilliant.
Very fascinating. I bet that was just such a great experience for everyone who attended, and it sounds like it's made a lasting impact on you as well.
Well, a very little story about that. When we went for Compact, there's a couple of people who were working for Compact on the lot. We went to the offices, the secret offices of the People's Lottery, and they had this massive wall about the size of a gym wall, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. I don't know, 50, 60 feet long. And it had the whole solution mapped out on the wall, and everything was covered up with flip charts paper, except the bit that meeting was about. So we couldn't see any of the other lots, just the lot we were working on. And it was almost like, we're going to have to put a hood over your head so you don't know whether it wasn't. But it was so secret squirrel stuff. And then when we'd gone, I guess they took all that stuff down, covered up our bit and opened up. And it was just so secretive. It was absolutely phenomenal. Phenomenal. Really brilliant.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I think we've picked your brain enough about all the, work stuff and the proposal stuff and the sales stuff. I think we're ready to lighten things up with our surprise rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Perfect, Chris. So, it's amazing. I think from 1970s to computers to now. If for some reason, Chris, computers have never been invented, do you think the world will be a better place?
No.
No? Okay. So why do you think so, Chris?
I think more than ever now, because of what's happening with COVID, that if we didn't have the communication that technology has enabled, it would be much tougher. If we look back at 75 years ago to the war, and, none of that technology existed, and we used to, it was so primitive. Now, okay, yes, you might be socially isolating alone, but, you can be contacted, you can do a Zoom, you can do a FaceTime, you can watch virtually anything you want on television, you can interact with anybody in the world. It's the communication, it's opened up communication. Okay, you can't be in a physical room with somebody, you can still miss the physical interaction, but technology's done a lot of harm, but it's done more good. So definitely. And I think that's really coming through now.
Yes, Chris, I think that's a great response. So, Chris, What's one food you refuse to share?
Probably lasagna.
Huh?
My mum's lasagna. You wouldn't know if my mum made a lasagna, and she's 90, so she stopped cooking it. You wouldn't even get a forkful, I'm afraid.
That's nice. Of course, mom's food, isn't it? So, what was your favorite toy when you were a kid?
My great aunt lived in Canada, and she every Christmas would send via her nephew, my dad, us very, very unique Christmas presents. And because she lived in Canada, she sent us this, my brother and I, this log cabin toy, which was a bit like Lego, but all the parts were like logs, and you could build your own sort of log cabin about the size of a shoebox. And it was amazing. And all my friends were just in total awe of this toy. And we probably had the only one ever in the UK. But we could build Canadian log cabins. It was just brilliant. Brilliant.
Oh, wow, that sounds like an amazing memory. Chris, if you could listen to one band for the rest of your life, which one you pick?
David Bowie.
David Bowie? Oh, nice.
Yeah, no competition.
Definitely, Chris. So, are you a healthy food person, Chris?
A healthy food person?
Uh-huh.
Massively, yes.
Oh, good. So anyway, I'll ask this. If you have a choice between McDonald's or Burger King, which one would you pick and why?
Neither. Both awful.
Okay. But if you don't have a choice,
horrid,
really hungry, that's the only food available. Anything?
No.
No?
No, well, I suppose, I think you can get a salad from McDonald's now. So it would be a salad from one of those places. Sorry.
Oh, Chris, impressive. So have you sent a text message to a wrong person, Chris?
No.
No? Oh, wow. That's so...
I sent an email to somebody once by mistake that was not very kind about them. It was somebody who lacked courage.
Okay.
And I wrote to a colleague, but unfortunately, in thinking about the person who lacked courage, I included them in the email. Wow. And it was sent to Bob, and it said Bob lacks courage.
Oops.
And then?
Bob and I are no longer friends. But it had run its course anyway.
That's brilliant. I think looks like courage means courage is important for you, Chris. Looks like you have used the word courage so many times in this episode now.
Yeah, I think if something's not working, you have to have the courage to do something about it.
That's right.
I mean, I remember going to see somebody once because I use these 360s, so I don't tell an organization what's wrong with them. I get them to run a 360 across their organization to self-diagnose, basically, harness the collective wisdom. And then I play the results back to them and I say, according to your people, these three things aren't working. Let's build a plan to fix them. And I remember somebody saying to me once, we are so bad, we'd have to do a project ourselves to get good enough to do that, so the results weren't too awful. If we did that now, the results would be so bad that it would be the ruin of us. And so they had to try, and it's almost like going for a golf lesson, and you say, no, I'd have to practice before I went for a golf lesson because I'm so bad. I couldn't go for a golf lesson because I'm so bad. But the whole point of the golf lesson is to make you better, isn't it? And I was just like, oh dear. Okay, fine. Have the courage.
Yes, well said, Chris. Well said. So
that's why I have golf lessons, by the way.
So how courageous are you at your golf now, Chris?
A lot better.
Oh, nice. That's great. So, okay, let's try this one. If you were invisible for 12 hours, what would you do?
Oof. I think that's that's something. The thing I'd really like to do is probably too personal to talk about. It's to do with somebody I miss terribly, who I'd like to go and see how they are.
Oh, wow, nice.
But
perfect.
Yeah, I can't say anymore. It's somebody that I love dearly, who I miss terribly, and I'd love to see them if they couldn't see me. And not a romantic type thing.
Yes.
Not, I don't love them in a romantic way. It's a family relationship.
That's nice, Chris. I mean, 100%. So we normally ask a question: who have you not met recently? Who you would like to meet? Looks like you already have someone in mind.
Yes.
That's great. So, Chris, if you were written about in a newspaper, on the front page, what would the headline say?
Well, I always said that if I wrote an autobiography, it'd probably be called Easily Distracted.
That applies to all.
But I think that's already been done. Somebody has got a book called that. But I am, in between going into another room to get something, I forgot why I'm going in the other room, and I probably do 3 other things and come back and go, blast.
Yes, I think
I've got a very active brain.
Okay.
It flits a lot.
Yes, yeah. I think it's normal. I think with this 8-week isolation that we are in, I'm sure it might have accelerated, right?
I've had to keep busy every day to stop myself. Yeah, I can't do nothing days. Sorry.
That's right. Last one on this question. So would you prefer to live in the Sahara Desert or in Antarctica?
Probably Sahara.
Oh, really? The hot?
Yeah, I do not like the cold.
Oh, interesting.
I really hate the cold.
Great. Okay. That's a good one, because when we asked the same question to a guest previously, he said the other way around. He doesn't like hot, so he prefers Antarctica. Well, that's always great. Okay, Chris. So, Chris, if we start from 1970s now, Chris, that's like 50 years plus of career, but 25 years in our industry. So plus beautiful family, entrepreneur, given so many things to so many people. Who are the people who have been the most influential in your life or career, Chris? And career?
That's a very good question. I think most people would struggle not to say their parents, and I'll count that as my one. I think my mum always says, I taught you to have good manners. If I only ever taught you one thing, it was to have good manners, which I always think is really important. And my dad gave me my love of music. So I'm grateful to both them. I think that counts as one. I had a boss when I was doing the Barclays and British Gas thing called Nick Brown. In fact, he was my boss's boss. And he was a massive influence on me, and we're still friends today. He now runs, he's the chief exec of the GB Group, and Nick's always been a massive influence, and somebody, if I ring him, he always rings back, are you okay? And I saw you rang. And I said, oh yeah, I just rang for chat. He's just amazing. And I think David Parry-Jones, now of Twilio, who I met in 2000 when he was sales director for Lotus, he is a really great guy and has got the courage always to do things. A brief from David is, I need an X. Can I leave it with you? Are you happy to do it for me? Yes, okay. Well, drop me a line with some, costs, but I need you to get on with it straight away. Anyway, how's the family? and he's never shirked from, Chris, I need your help. I've never heard an excuse from David for not doing anything. It's always been instigated by him. I need you to do this. And I just wish there were more people. He's the only customer I've ever had who I bought a birthday present for, which is a book on leadership by James Schooler, which I really liked. And, David's the most courageous leader of all the people I've worked for in the last 20 years. Can I have a fourth?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay, so mum, dad, Nick Brown, David Power-Jones, and a guy called Les Ewan, who I've been working with on and off for the last 5, 6, 7 years, who's a really great guy, and we're always bouncing ideas off each other, and he's a Yorkshireman as well. So very direct, and he's fantastic.
Perfect, Chris. So what's the best piece of advice you've received, and from whom?
The best piece of advice I received was when I set up on my own as a bid consultant in 1999, and I got a contract straight away working for Compaq as a contract bid manager. And I had a friend called David Howell, who lives in Reading in Berkshire, who was a procurement consultant. And I talked to David about what I was going to do. And he said, have a methodology. If you're going to be a consultant, you can't just go into somebody and say, I'm a consultant. You have to say, I'm a consultant, this is my methodology. And he pointed me at CMM, capability maturity models or methodology. And I looked at CMM and like the sort of, five levels of capability or whatever capability, because it's capability maturity model. And I built all my 360s around that model. And I think when you have a methodology, it's not just I'm a consultant, we come in and do this and we do this. There is an underlying methodology, and that's all. That means I have a very structured approach to doing things, very much in the way that automated operations was a methodology, wasn't it?
Yes.
Very structured way of running computers. So I've always been quite structured and logical. That was the best bit of advice I've ever had.
Perfect, Chris. Sounds great. So what is something you have observed lately that you're reminded that people are good?
Definitely what's been happening in this COVID-19 situation. And I am part of a group of people in our local golf club who help older members with shopping and errands and collecting prescriptions, because a lot of the members are older single people, widows, and the one of that group said that they had got too much in terms of supplies, and was there anybody who would benefit from this? And through that person offering it to me and me offering it to the group, we've been able to help somebody who has been laid off from work, and every week we're able to give them a food parcel. And it was just so great that we were able to connect, that somebody in a very good, stable, financial situation reached out and said, listen, I've got too much. There must be somebody that doesn't. And, every week, nothing to do with me, but through the group, we're able to help somebody who's been disadvantaged by all this. And I just think it's such a wonderful thing that we're able to help this. And luckily enough, I've been able to go around there a couple of times with a box of, groceries, and this person was just so overjoyed because they've got, no money coming in. So that's really given me renewed faith in, not that I ever lost my faith, but, in mankind, really. So.
So Chris, we're down to our final 3 questions that we have for you. Looking back, your very successful career in computers and then, going over more into the sales aspect and bids, what's one thing that you wish you had known when you began your career?
That's a very interesting question. I actually came up with 10 things, but I'm going to give you the main one.
Okay.
About 7 or 8 years ago, my nephew, who went to a very good school, invited me to go and speak to the sixth formers, the upper sixth, the people who are just about to leave to go to university. And I did a talk called 10 Things I Wish I'd Known When I Left School, which I still do if schools, are interested in getting me to do it.
Yeah.
But the core message in that is basically do a good job and stay in touch.
Yeah.
Because, obviously everything you do, you want to do to the best of your ability. But to maximize that, and LinkedIn's a great help with doing this, obviously, is stay in touch with those people.
Absolutely.
So, and I remember very early on, I think one of the first actual consultancy gigs I did, somebody said to me, bit like your surprise question round, how do I know you're going to do a good job? And I said to them, how many people are there in your team that I'm going to interact with? And he said, 30 something. So I said, I've got two choices then. I do a good job and I win 30 friends who will move on and will become potentially customers in the future, or I do a bad job and I make 30 enemies, and bad news travels faster than good news. And he said, that's very good. And it's obvious that you do a good job and stay in touch, but a lot of people don't. They miss the second part in a way. And I think, and also they do it in quite an insincere way. I hate the bit on LinkedIn where it says, Bob's got a new job, and you can click a button and say, congratulations, Bob.
Yeah.
I either don't do it or I write a personal message.
Yeah.
And I think, it is absolutely about it. I've got friends who I worked with when I was a computer operator, who I met when 50 years ago when I was a computer operator.
Right.
One of them is, Paul Heath. He lives in New Zealand now, and we're still in touch.
Yeah,
and we still
amazing.
share the same love of the same music. And he's been my friend for 50 years. So
That's great.
Do a good job. Stay in touch.
Yeah. So on a similar note, if someone came to you asking for advice, how to pursue a successful career, kind of like yours, what advice would you give them?
Can you afford to do it?
Mm-hmm.
A corporate business as usual job or whatever, you might get bored with it. You might think, I'd rather do something else, blah, 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 blah. But at least you get paid every month.
Right.
And, going self-employed, when Practical Bid Solutions was at its peak, and we shut that down in 2008 because of the recession in 2008, we had to make £20,000 a month to pay the bills.
Wow.
So we had to bill £20,000 worth of billing to pay the wages of all the people. So that's probably sort of 50 billing days, 40, 50 billing days a month of consultancy work. That is hard work. And imagine now I was having to do that.
Right.
And this crisis had come along. And when we got out in 2008, it was a similar situation. The economy crashed. We could see the next couple of £20,000, but beyond that, we couldn't see it. And we thought, do we want to go bust? No. Let's just shut the business down. Let's make people redundant. And I started out again on my own as Get to Great. So, can you afford to do it? It might seem glamorous because, people see the day rate that you get as a consultant. But what they forget is behind every day of consultancy, there's probably 2 days of work to get it. So, most of the projects I do are never more than 10 days. Very rarely more than 10 days.
Yeah, interesting.
But you know, they probably cost 10 to 20 days to win the business. So you've expelled 30 days effort for 10 days pay.
Right.
So you can't say I'm on X a day. You're actually on a third of X a day.
Right.
Aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Very great advice, and something, you know, everyone would need to consider trying to be an entrepreneur and run such a big organization.
Yeah, my son, who's 41, the one who got the BAFTA, he's gone out as a freelance television producer.
Wow.
And luckily, he's had lots of work because of the BAFTA nomination, and he never seems to be out of work. But his wife has got a permanent job. So they've got one assured salary and one salary that ebbs and flows.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a better position to be in. I wouldn't want to be single and self-employed.
Oh, yeah, no, very risky, right?
Very risky, especially, you know, when I put 3 kids through university while I was self-employed. So, you know, very risky.
Definitely. So, Chris, you've done so much. You have accomplished so many things. You seem to be in a very comfortable place right now. What's something you're looking forward to in the future?
A project's just come up that I'm hoping to start next week, working with an organisation that's going to sell through the channel, so sell their services through the channel. And then myself and one of the guys who's working already are going to work on a project to define the engagement process with their channel partners, identifying them, onboarding them, you know, business as usual, what that looks like. So, you know, that's very exciting. And there's some other I like short-term projects to, you know, and there's sort of 3 or 4 of them in the pipeline. Mm-hmm. You know, and I probably aspire to do 50 days work a year, actually billing. Mm-hmm. And I can see that, you know, in my pipeline. So that's great. So, you know, and getting back on the golf course.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I live in a wonderful part of the world, and I live near my family. So 50 days a year, I'm very happy.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. And it sounds like, you know, a great aspiration of just being able to split your time and share your time and enjoy golf and your family, and then, you know, enjoy what you're doing the rest of the time with work.
Yes, I think I've always had the attitude that, you know, enjoy it first. And one little story to close. Years ago, when we had Practical Bid Solutions, probably about 2005, I did some work with an architect's business around, you know, improving their pursuit and bidding stuff. It was just a one-day workshop, and I got paid well for the one-day workshop, but the money didn't come particularly quickly. And a couple of weeks later, we got a letter in an envelope at the office, and the person said, just wanted to say that, you know, it was the session with Chris was really great, blah, 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 and that they'd won a piece of business that they would not have considered bidding for prior to the workshop. And it turned out that they were a non-Jewish company, but they'd been sent an ITT to refurbish a synagogue. And they thought, okay, so what did Chris say? Chris said, if you're not sure whether you should bid or not, ring up and talk to the bidders about why you've been asked to bid. So they rang the synagogue and said, hey, thanks for the opportunity. Great. Can we just ask why you've asked us to bid? And they said, well, because all the other architects are people who just do up synagogues, but we want something out of the box. We want something different. We don't want people with preconceived ideas of what a synagogue should be like. We want some fresh thinking. So we thought if we came to you, we get some fresh thinking. So they bid, and with the lens of these people are looking for something different and want the business. And in the letter, they said we would not have bid for it because we'd have just looked at it on face value and said, synagogue, we're not a Jewish firm. We don't understand synagogues and what synagogues want. Let's not bid.
Oh, what an amazing story. Yeah.
And the girl in the office who gave me the letter said, oh, and by the way, they didn't include a check, so they still haven't paid. They paid a couple of days afterwards because that was the process. But the letter meant more to me than the getting paid was just money towards the 20 grand we needed. But the letter meant absolutely everything because, you know, I'd made a difference.
Absolutely.
And they'd gone to the trouble to write a letter.
Yeah, we don't see that often anymore, do we?
No. And David Parry-Jones said to me once, I've been thinking about what you do. And I said, this was over a beer. And I said, okay, go on then. And he said, you make other people look good. And I said, yeah, I understand what you mean. He said, if I can expand, he said, it's never about you and wow, look what I've done and everything like that. He said, I give you a job to do. You do the job. Everybody thinks that I, you know, not that I, i.e. David, did the job. He just, you know, it works, but it's never about you. You're not there going, hey, I did this, you know. And he said that's really good because you know, if I gave you the job to do, you're doing the job for me. It's not about you. And that's what's so good about what you do. And I just thought it was a great thing because so often consultancy is a bit of an ego trip.
Yeah.
And, you know, I try not to make it an ego trip. I just want to see the results.
Yeah. No, that's amazing.
And then get paid.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great when you have those people who take the time to share the results, and that's why you do it, right? You're doing it to help others and to find those courageous people and help them, you know, leverage. I don't think courage.
I felt that way when I had two children at university at the same time. I was a bit more cutthroat then. That was definitely that was about earning the money to pay. But, you know, once you got past that hurdle and money's less of a driver, and it can't ever be more than a driver when you've got two kids at university, you know, you can be more relaxed about it, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, you have done some extensive research on the relationship between sales and bids, Chris. Before we close, do you want to share some insights, Chris?
Yes, it was a really interesting exercise. When I became a member of APS, I was very keen that the Association of Professional Sales link up with APMP. And despite my role in getting APMP going in the UK, I'd never actually spoke at a conference because I always felt that I didn't want to be seen to be promoting myself. I always felt a bit self-conscious about promoting myself. So I thought, well, if I do some research into this question, I did it all online using a 360 and sent it to, you know, everybody I knew in the bid and the sales community. And I presented that paper, which I think was at the back end of 17. And then when APMP and APS announced their alliance, which came out of that conference in 17, at the back end of 19, I reran the research again. And the situation really hadn't changed. And the papers, by the way, if anybody wants them, I didn't do it for making money, shall we say. So it's all freely available. What's really interesting about it is not the sort of, yes, obviously there is a gap, but why is there a gap and what can we do about it? And there are in the paper, which is, I can't remember, 20 plus pages long, it's all the input from the sales and bid professionals all over the globe, because we had contributions from goodness knows how many different countries with ideas about how to close the gap, you know, why there is a gap, you know, largely around communication and lack of understanding of each other's the pressures on each one. But it's a body of work in a sense that, I'm one of the people. I did complete the survey myself, so I took it as a pundit, but I did it as a sales consultant because you had to choose a role. But there are so many brilliant ideas in there, because a book largely is one man's opinion or one woman's opinion, isn't one person's opinion. This is the opinion of, I can't remember, 250 people responded, maybe. I can't remember off the top of my head how many it was. But there is some fantastic stuff in there. If somebody felt it was a problem in their organization, if they read this, they would get loads of ideas of how to fix it. So there's a lot of free consultancy in there, and a lot of bid and sales consultants contributed to it. So there were practitioners and consultants. So there's some fantastic ideas. But yes, there is a gap. It's less of a gap than it was 2 years prior to that. And I can't remember now whether it was a bigger problem in the UK than it was in the US. I think it was less of a problem in the UK than it was in the US. I think the US thought it was a bigger problem. It's because I can analyse it by geography and which discipline, which side of the fence you sit on, and by role. But the paper is just the findings. There's no conclusions or recommendations. And that was going to be something that APMP and APS were going to pick up and run with. Just if people email me, I'll let them have the findings.
Perfect, Chris. That's brilliant. So thank you so much, Chris, for your time today at the podcast. And thank you for everything you have done for the profession. It's been a real privilege to have you with us at Scribble Talk. So wish you all the good health, happiness. Please continue to inspire not just bid and proposal, but salespeople, everybody around you. And
thank you.
Stay healthy and stay happy. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today.
I've enjoyed it, both of you. Thank you so much.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit batchyscribble.com/podcast to listen to this episode and check out any of our other previously recorded episodes. If you've enjoyed today's interview, don't forget to subscribe, review, and share the Scribble Talk podcast. We hope you'll check out our next episode where we interview another industry expert and special guest. Until then, it's Ashley Kays,
Bhaskar Sundram,
signing off.